This story is shared by kind permission of Reddit user, Just a Renegade. So, I figured I'd go through and list some of the weird, unexplained things that have happened in my life, and see if anyone can make any sense out of any of it. Likewise, please note that I am a Christian, and there will be Christian content in this post. If that offends you, or gives you the urge to make a snarky comment, hit that back arrow. My mom's side of the family, at least the women anyways, have always seemed to be magnets for the paranormal, and they all have had paranormal experiences. 1. Mom said when I was around 2 to 3 years old, we lived in a little log cabin that was on a back road. Since we were the only people on that property, aside from her aunt, who lived down the road, my parents got me a little electric pink Jeep, and would follow me around while I drove in it. One afternoon, I was driving the Jeep in the driveway, and my mom said she looked over at me while she was sweeping the porch, and I was standing with my hands up at the sky and a blissful look on my face. My mom yelled my name repeatedly, and I looked at her and said, "Mama, Jesus is coming back." And she promptly screamed, freaked out, and dragged me into the house. 2. When I was little, I have a very, very strong memory of my mom's grandmother, my Granny Ollie, sitting around teaching me about magic and the things that women in our family had been taught for generations. I would have probably been around 2 to 3. Weird thing is, Granny Ollie died when my mom was in her 20s, long before she adopted me. I swore up and down to my mom that Granny Ollie and my Nana were witches, and that they had special powers. Mom would turn pale every time I mentioned it, hastily shush me, and tell me not to talk about that sort of stuff. My Nana also seemed to just have an energy about her. 3. From ages 2 to 5, I had an imaginary friend. I know that's not uncommon, but the scary thing was, to me he was real, and I could touch him, interact with him. I'd given him a name, his own life, and felt like he was my guardian. My mom didn't think anything of it at first, and brushed me off, telling her that an angel named Michael, who was very tall with big wings and a sword, watched over me. I told her that he was my friend, and he was there to protect me. Michael never became a scapegoat for anything I did, but a handful of times he actually did protect me, including once when he stood around me with his wings curled around me when someone tried to snatch me in a store. And I had forgotten about that incident until I started typing all of this out. After a while, Mom got exasperated with me, and then got angry and told me that imaginary friends weren't real, and that I needed to stop the foolishness. I had a fairly good grasp of things, even as a young child, so I knew myself that imaginary friends weren't real. But I also understood that Michael was not an imaginary friend. Eventually, I told him it was upsetting my mom. We couldn't talk anymore. He still showed up from time to time, but not nearly as often as he did. A couple of years ago, I told this story to my uncle, co-worker, whom I've sort of adopted as an uncle figure. And he said everyone has an angel assigned to them, and that it could be that Archangel Michael was the one assigned to me. 4. Mom told me that when I was 2, she would take me to the graveyard next to our farm and let me walk around to get some exercise and to do some running around. Being a precocious 2-year-old, I immediately took off whenever she took me over there. Typically, she'd find me several minutes later, crouched down in front of a tombstone, talking to it, as if someone was there. I would proceed to describe to her what the people looked like and what their names were. I think I even told her stuff like, "He's got a hole in his tummy, Mommy." Generally, the children's graves were what I was drawn to. I'd plop down with my toys and hum, and play like I was playing with another kid. To this day, I still have an unnatural attraction to graveyards. 5. When I was 6, my mom had a friend come over to visit us. He was a former Native American medicine man, who had eventually become a Christian, and they had apparently known each other for years. He had come to visit us several times, and I always felt so at peace around him. He didn't even seem to mind that I wanted to crawl up in his lap and begged him to tell me stories. I remember he used to tell me stories that he had heard living on the reservation. One day, he had a serious talk with my mom. I could tell by their hushed voices, and my mom fussing at me to go play with my toys anytime I came in the kitchen. When they came out, my mom looked like she had been crying, and the man presented me with a blue dream catcher and an eagle feather. He told me, "Little one, dreams will be very important to you. Keep this, it will protect you." He touched me on the forehead and mumbled something, and then he left. I never saw him again after that, but we moved a couple of years later. This will tie into a later thing. 6. When I was 7, my cousin passed away from complications resulting from taking an illegal steroid. She was 21. My mom got the call late in the evening that they were rushing my cousin into the emergency room and that she needed to come down there. I was very ill with a double ear infection and strep throat. So Mom bundled me up and brought me a pillow and blanket, letting me curl up on the chairs and sleep. I had a very vivid dream in which my cousin came to me and told me that she had to leave now, but that she would watch over me. She told me to be smart and brave and always love. She then walked into a bright white light. I was woken up minutes later by my mom shaking me and telling me that my cousin had been pronounced dead. I told her I knew that already and went back to sleep. 7. 10 months later, my uncle, the cousin's father, died of complications from back surgery. He threw a blood clot in his lung or brain and died. I was at the hospital again when this happened and had fallen asleep again. He stopped to smile at me and said, "I gotta go home now, Peanut," his nickname for me. "I will always love you," and went into that same light. When I was woken up and given the news from my mom, I told her that he had come to me in a dream, and that he told me that he loved me. 8. I say that my cousin passing was sort of the beginning of the majority of my paranormal experiences, or perhaps it was that they had become more intense. Around this time I would frequently see my cousin's spirit walking through my house, and she would often appear to me in dreams and give me advice. It became nearly a nightly occurrence for me. 9. At age 7, my other cousin had come to visit, and we had been told by my parents to clean my bedroom. We had suckered one of the neighborhood girls in the apartment complex to come help us, by promising she could stay for the pizza my parents had gone to get. I was in my closet, putting clothes back on a low shelf, and suddenly felt very ill. I saw a terrible wreck happen, and knew that the person in the car was dead. And my parents had been stopped by the police and told to take an alternate route. Well, the alternate road would put them getting home 15 minutes later. I came to. I suppose I had passed out. And my cousin and the girl were standing over me debating on who was going to throw the cold water on my face. I told them about the wreck and my parents being late, but they brushed me off. My parents showed up 15 minutes later than they had said they would be home, and I chimed in that it had been a wreck and they had been delayed. My mom and dad looked at each other, but didn't say anything since they didn't actually see the wreck. They had gotten there by the time the cops had shut down the road a few miles back. That evening on the 6 p.m. news, the reporter talked about a fatal wreck that had backed up traffic for over a mile. My cousin looked at me with terror on her face. My mom looked like she was going to cry. 10. My mom used to frequently take me shopping at a discount store called Big Lots when I was a kid. It was sort of a weekly thing with us, and we made a big day of going to lunch, going to Big Lots, hitting up a few smaller boutiques, etc. One afternoon, we went down to Big Lots, and I told my mom that I would go look at the toys, and she told me she'd be over in the food, spices, etc. area. I walked to the back and browsed around before I spotted my mom walking by with her cart. She never made eye contact, but I yelled, "Hey, I'm right here." She didn't stop or anything. And when I came around the corner into the aisle she would have been turning into, she was completely gone. There was no way she could have turned down that aisle and then gotten to the end and walked away before I made it around the corner. So because I have had anxiety since I was probably 3 or 4, I immediately think, oh God, she's been kidnapped. Because my train of thought was always the worst case scenario. I take off like a madwoman and search every aisle till I find her across the store in the spices where she said she would be. She was actually coming around a corner, and from her expression she was pissed at me. She proceeds to yell, "Why did you run off like that? I told you to come here." I proceed to tell her that I saw her across the store, and I yelled to her, "Hey, I'm right here." And she didn't answer me. According to my mom, she said she stayed in the food the whole time, but that she had yelled my name, and I had answered, "Hey, I'm right here," and disappeared around a corner, and she yelled for me to come here and that I didn't answer. I told her the exact same situation happened to me, on the other side of the store. Suddenly my mom turned really pale and said, "We need to go, and don't you ever bring this up again." Being the child I am, I asked her about it many times over the years, and she claims she has no memory of it happening. 11. We had moved to a different city due to my dad's job, and not long after we moved in, I was putting things up on an oak mirrored dresser we had. Suddenly, a little girl ghost came running into my room. I could make out her features, but she was sort of see-through and a greyish-white colour, with a dog, and knocked a bunch of stuff off my dresser as she floated up and through the window. My mom came in to see what all the noise was, and I told her about the ghost. Mom just turned pale. "Man, she does that a lot with me," and shook her head silently before walking out of the room. 12. I began having feelings of deja vu as early as 5, but they increased in frequency and intensity when I hit puberty. Around the age of 10, I began to have terrible nightmares about natural disasters, crimes, etc., that I would see on the news either 2 days, 2 weeks, or 2 months later. While the dreams may or may not have been exact, they were definite signs of bad things to come. 2 weeks before the Twin Towers were hit, I had an awful dream of a plane flying into a house, and people falling from the sky like rain. 2 weeks later, the footage of the Twin Towers was shown on the news. Other such events were the Gothenburg fire. I had a dream about people running into a building on fire with smoke everywhere 2 days before. The Japan tsunami. I dreamt of a mountain that began to break apart from an earthquake, and a wave of snow began swallowing people up 2 months before. Because of that, I really started to hate the number 2. My uncle told me a couple of years ago that he feels I possess the gift of prophetic dreaming. Now, I also found that eagle feathers and the colour blue are symbolic of prophetic dreamers, which links back to the feather in the blue dreamcatcher I was given by the medicine man. 13. When I was a little kid, I used to write stories about myself and a girl named Alex, who was my best friend. At age 13, I met my now best friend, Alexandra. 14. When I was in middle school, I had some really bad things happen. As a result, I attempted suicide 3 times while I was in middle school. Each time I should have died, and I didn't. Twice I tried to overdose on medication, only to have it have zero effect on me. Once it was a whole bottle of Tylenol, second time was a bottle of antidepressants. And the third time, slit my wrists, only to have the cuts mysteriously disappear the next day, with no indication they were ever there. And I know I did it. There were later 2 more suicide attempts. I miraculously survived. 15. When I was 13, I tried to step out into the road while a car was coming. To this day, I don't know if I was trying to commit suicide or not, if that makes any sense. But I heard the rustle of wings and someone, grabbed me very hard by the shoulders and pulled me out onto the road with such force that I stumbled backwards and fell on my backside. 16. One night around age 13, I was laying in my bed when suddenly I saw some sort of weird light on my ceiling. It was almost like those old school purple balls where you touch it and it makes your hair stand up. It went on for about 20 minutes, and when I glanced over at the foot of my bed, I saw a girl who looked like me, but not quite me, sitting there. She began to talk to me and continued showing up like that for a few years. She called herself Wren, which is the nickname that I took on around age 12, and began asking people to call me by. She looked older than me, but given that that was 11 years ago, and I look nothing like that now, I have no idea what it was. Unless it was a me from even further in the future? 17. I once heard small children sing, "I'm a little teapot," over and over for 4.5 hours. No, I do not do drugs. I probably should. I can't listen to small children sing because it freaked me out so badly. 18. At age 12, I began to have vivid dreams of a boy named Xavier and a white female wolf with blue eyes that would basically teach me life lessons, warn me about things, and give me advice. The boy aged as I aged, and had dark hair and bright green eyes. These dreams continued until probably 2 years ago. However, the wolf still shows up in my dreams. She has even shown up in real life too. One evening I woke up and felt something tugging me to go outside. I stepped out onto the porch and saw a white wolf with blue eyes standing in the middle of my road. She stood there and we just watched each other for a good 20 minutes before she howled and took off into the woods. The next day my mom was eating breakfast with me and asked if I had heard the howling going on the night before. I have learned she is likely my spirit guide and will show up whenever I need to be warned or whenever change is coming. 19. At age 13, my parents decided to send their anemic, borderline asthmatic, uncoordinated, accident-prone child to summer camp. I got peer-pressured, or camp counselor pressured rather, into taking the rappelling course. Now, I was already scared of heights by this point, and I really didn't want to, but that guy kept pressuring me and telling me I have to live a little. I made it down the cliff successfully. Then the counselor up top told me to unhook my clip from the rope and head up the other cliff with no equipment on. It was supposed to be like sets of stairs with some climbing, but halfway up I misstepped and ended up going backwards off the cliff. As I was falling and bouncing off the rocks on the way down, I heard that flutter of wings again, and something grabbed me and slowed me down as I fell, rotating me so that it took the brunt of the landing. And the energy felt just like what I had remembered from my imaginary friend Michael. I laid there and stared at the sky for a minute, hearing screams and crying from the cliff above me. I had fallen 25 to 30 feet down this cliff and somehow managed to walk away with a small hematoma on my left hip, a broken tailbone, and some bruises and cuts. I should have died or been paralyzed. 20. I have also seen my share of demons and negative energies in my 24 years. 21. At age 14, I was coming home from dinner in the next town over with my best friend and her mom. As we were coming around a big curve in the road, we saw a massive UFO hanging over the road. People around it started honking their horns, and we saw a few people pointing. It was oval-shaped, kind of at a slant, and had a series of rotating colours in pink, blue, white, green, and orange. It moved slowly across the sky for about 10 minutes, then blinked out, and disappeared. There was never a single peep on the news about it. 3 years later, another friend and I were in my backyard, laying on my trampoline, and we saw the exact same UFO, hovering over my backyard for a few minutes. She ran into the house to get her phone, and it disappeared about the time my friend came running back out with her phone to get a picture. 22. When I was 16, my ex and I got the bright idea to do our own ghost investigation because we were young and dumb and got way too into ghost adventures. We watched it frequently at my house when I was in high school because my mom is a paranormal fan. Well, we grabbed a tape recorder and went into my room and asked the usual questions. When I said, "What is your name? I promise we aren't here to hurt you. We want to help you," A candle blew out of my room, and my ex got really uncomfortable. We stopped, played the tape back, and heard a voice say, "My name is Anthony." We let my mom hear it, and we all promptly freaked out. A few minutes later, we heard a loud noise from my room, and everything from my nightstand had been thrown on the floor. Then I had to walk my ex home because he was too scared to go by himself. 23. I have one final one that still bothers me a bunch to this day. I am sure anyone who's seen the original X-Files remembers the white figure that opened a door in the original opening sequence. It was the shape of a man, but was all white, glowing, devoid of actual features. Well, for as long as I can remember, I saw that same figure show up at every house we ever lived at. He never says anything, never does me any harm, but he will look into my room or walk in, stand there, and walk out. Too long, didn't read. I have had something weird or paranormal happen to me just about every year I have been alive. Am I a magnet for the paranormal? Hey guys, Elfreezer here. Special thanks there to Just a Renegade for allowing me to use her story. I was actually going to just put a normal 3 stories paranormal video up this week, but as I recorded this one, I realised it was going to be about as long as a regular paranormal video would be, so it'd be much better just to include it as a special episode. Hope you guys enjoyed that. It certainly was very interesting and fun for me to read it. And if you are enjoying these paranormal stories, I'll certainly continue to do more in the future. Until next time, guys, thank you very much for listening, and take good care of yourselves.